Picture a string of beads, held in the hand. For hundreds of millions of people in the West, that image is instantly recognizable. It's the Catholic Rosary. A looped string of 59 beads, a centerpiece medal, and a crucifix dangling from the end. It's an icon of a specific faith, a tool used to count specific prayers, the Hail Marys, the Our Fathers, the Glory Beswell, meditating on specific events in the life of Christ and Mary. It feels uniquely, quintessentially Catholic. But what if I told you that this simple, tactile tool is one of the most universal pieces of spiritual technology ever invented by humankind? What if I told you that a Buddhist monk, deep in the Himalayas, chanting a mantra, a Muslim Sufi mystic in Istanbul, remembering the names of Allah, a Hindu sadhu meditating by the Ganges, repeating a sacred sound, and that Catholic nun in Rome, praying her Hail Marys, are all at this very moment using a nearly identical tool for the exact same fundamental purpose? This is the secret, shared history of the prayer bead. It's a story of a brilliant idea that seems to have either crisscrossed continents and cultures over millennia, or perhaps been invented independently, again and again, by people in vastly different traditions, all seeking the same connection to the divine, the same mastery over their own minds. It raises a fascinating question: are we all connected by our shared spiritual tools, revealing a common human need for tangible focus? Or is this just the obvious, logical solution to a universal human problem of distraction? Today, we are tracing the threads of a global technology from the ancient plains of India, across the Silk Road, through the deserts of Arabia, and into the monasteries of medieval Europe, to uncover the hidden, interconnected history of the prayer bead. Before we trace its fascinating history, we must first reframe what we're looking at. A string of prayer beads, whether it's called a mala, a tasbih, a rosary, or something else, is not primarily jewelry. It is a tool. It is a piece of spiritual technology, elegantly designed to solve a fundamental problem inherent in the human condition: the wandering mind. Think of it as a mental abacus, or perhaps a sacred fidget spinner. The human mind, as anyone who has ever tried to pray silently, meditate, or even just focus intently on a single task for more than 30 seconds knows, is a restless, distractible creature. The Buddhists call it the monkey mind, constantly jumping from branch to branch, an itch on your nose, a memory of yesterday's lunch, a worry about tomorrow's meeting, a snippet of a song. This internal chatter, this constant stream of consciousness, is a fundamental human challenge, especially when trying to engage in focused spiritual practice. Now, imagine your religious tradition involves repetition, repeating a sacred name, a mantra, a short prayer, 10, 50, 100, even thousands of times. This practice of rhythmic repetition is a core technique in many of the world's spiritual traditions, believed to quiet the ego, focus the intention, invoke divine presence, or cultivate specific virtues. But it presents a specific technical problem. How do you keep track? You can't easily achieve a deep meditative focus on the mystical meaning of Om, Mani, Padme Hum, or Hail Mary, full of grace, if the front office of your brain is simultaneously busy with the mundane task of counting 7, 8, 9, wait, was that 9 or 10? Shoot, I lost count. The very act of numerical tracking becomes the primary distraction, pulling you out of the deeper, prayerful, or meditative state you're trying to achieve. The prayer bead is the ingenious low-tech solution to this high-tech mental problem. Its brilliance lies in offloading the mechanical act of counting from your working memory to your fingers. The simple, repetitive, tactile motion of rolling a bead between your thumb and forefinger, or moving from one knot to the next, anchors your body in the present moment through physical sensation. This grounding, physical anchoring, then frees the mind to focus entirely on the content, the meaning, and the intention of the prayer or mantra being repeated. It is a tool for achieving a flow state, for synchronizing mind, body, and spirit into a single, focused, rhythmic act of devotion. It transforms a potentially distracting, mentally taxing repetition into a smooth, embodied meditation. and the earliest, clearest archaeological and textual evidence we have for this brilliant spiritual technology comes from the cradle of several world religions. Ancient India. Our journey begins in the Indian subcontinent, possibly with roots stretching back as early as the 8th century BCE associated with Vedic traditions, but certainly becoming well established by the 3rd century BCE with the flourishing of Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. Here we find the Japa Mala. The Sanskrit word japa means to mutter, to whisper, or to repeat internally, and mala simply means garland, wreath, or string of beads. The mala is typically a masterpiece of spiritual design, steeped in numerological and cosmological symbolism. It almost always consists of 108 beads. This number is profoundly significant across multiple dharmic religions. There are said to be 108 Upanishads, foundational Hindu philosophical texts. There are traditionally 108 sacred sites, pithas, throughout India. In Ayurvedic medicine, there are 108 sacred points marmas on the human body. In Buddhist temples, bells are often rung 108 times to welcome the new year. Some Buddhist traditions say 108 represents the number of defilements or mental afflictions, kleshas that a practitioner is seeking to overcome through their practice. Others note its astronomical significance. The average distance of the Sun and Moon to Earth is roughly 108 times their respective diameters. Whatever the precise origin of the number's significance, 108 became the sacred standard for the mala. At the end of the loop of 108 beads, there is traditionally a single, larger bead, or sometimes a differently shaped bead, known as the guru bead representing the teacher, or the Sumeru, or stupa bead representing Mount Meru, the cosmic mountain, or a Buddhist reliquary structure. This bead is often followed by a decorative tassel, sometimes said to symbolize the lotus flower of enlightenment or the interconnectedness of all beings. The function is simple yet profound. A practitioner, a sadhaka, holds the mala, usually draped over their right middle finger, with the thumb used to move the beads. They begin reciting their chosen mantra, sacred sound like Om, a word or a phrase invoking a deity or embodying a spiritual quality. As they complete one full recitation, they use their thumb to gently pull one bead toward them over the middle finger, then move to the next bead for the next repetition. When their thumb reaches the distinct guru bead, they know they have completed one full cycle of 108 repetitions. They then pause. If they wish to continue for another cycle, they do not cross over the guru bead. That would be symbolically akin to stepping over one's teacher or disrespecting the sacred center. Instead, they turn the mala around in their hand and reverse direction, going back the way they came for another 108 repetitions. This tool was far more than just a counter. It was a pacer, guiding the rhythm of the meditation. It was a guide, marking the beginning and end of a sacred cycle. It was a complete, self-contained meditative circuit, grounding the practitioner in the physical act while their mind focused on the mantra. As Buddhism emerged from this same spiritual soil in India around the 5th century BC, it naturally adopted this powerful and already established technology. Buddhist monks and nuns, as well as lay practitioners, embraced the mala. And as Buddhism spread geographically, carried by monks and missionaries along the Silk Road and the maritime trade routes, the mala traveled with it. It spread across Asia to China, where it's called shuldru, counting beads, to Tibet, trenwa, to Korea, yomu, and to Japan, juzu shuldru, adapting slightly in the materials used, wood, seeds, bone. And sometimes, the number of beads. Zen Buddhism often uses 108, but other forms exist. But retaining its core function as an indispensable tool for counting mantras, breaths, or prostrations, the 108 bead mala became a near universal symbol and tool of Buddhist practice worldwide. Now, let's follow a different historical thread, moving westward from India into the heart of the emerging Islamic world. If you visit a mosque, observe Muslims in personal prayer, or encounter adherents of Sufism, the mystical branch of Islam, you will often see them using a string of beads. This is known as a tasbih or misbah. The form is often strikingly similar to the molar, typically a loop of beads, sometimes with divider beads marking sections, and often ending in an elongated terminal piece or a decorative tassel. However, the numbers used in the tasbih are typically different. Reflecting Islamic theology. A full tasbih most often has 99 beads. Alternatively, a smaller, more common string consists of 33 beads, which the practitioner would cycle through 3 times to reach 9. The function, again, is remarkably similar to the mala. It is used for dhikr, which means remembrance of God. Dhikr is a core devotional practice in Islam, often performed individually after the 5 daily prayers salat, but also in communal Sufi gatherings. The practitioner moves through the beads, reciting specific devotional phrases intended to keep God constantly in mind. Commonly, they use the 33-bead string, or sections of the 99-bead string, to repeat. Subhanallah, glory be to God, 33 times. Alhamdulillah, praise be to God, 33 times. Allahu Akbar, God is great, est, 33 times. This adds up to 99 repetitions. This number directly corresponds to the 99 beautiful names of Allah al-Azam al-Husna, described in the Quran and Islamic tradition, names like Ar-Rahman, the most compassionate, Ar-Rahim, the most merciful, Ar-Malik, the sovereign king. The 99-bead tasbih allows for reciting these names directly, one for each bead, as a profound act of meditation on God's attributes. So where did the tasbih come from? When did Muslims start using beads for dhikr? This is where the history gets fascinating and involves some scholarly debate. Some devout Muslim traditions attempt to link the practice of using counting aids directly back to the Prophet Muhammad himself, early 7th century CE, citing certain accounts hadith, where he reportedly approved of his wives using date pits or pebbles to keep track of praises to God. However, these hadith are debated in authenticity, and they refer to loose items, not strung beads. Most secular historians, as well as many Islamic scholars, agree that the stringed tasbih as a formal, common devotional tool appeared in the Islamic world several centuries later, likely solidifying around the 9th or 10th century CE, and its appearance seems to be a fairly clear case of cultural borrowing or influence. Where did it likely come from? The historical timeline and geographical proximity strongly point east, to the exact place where prayer beads were already an ancient and ubiquitous tradition, India. As the early Islamic caliphates expanded their trade routes, military campaigns, and cultural interactions deep into the Indian subcontinent, especially Sindh, modern Pakistan, from the 8th century onwards, Muslims undoubtedly encountered the widespread use of Hindu and Buddhist japa malas. Recognizing the immense practicality and profound usefulness of this simple spiritual technology for their own practice of dhikr, they likely adopted the two. They naturally adapted the number of beads from the Indian 108 to the Islamically significant 99 or 33 to fit their own theological framework, the 99 names of Allah. The core technology using beads on a string to focus the mind during repetitive prayer was simply too good, too effective, not to borrow and adapt. This brings us finally, and perhaps most complexly, to the West, and to the Rosary. If you asked a devout Catholic grandmother where the Rosary came from, she might tell you the beautiful and widely beloved pious legend that fully solidified in the 15th century, that the Virgin Mary herself appeared to Saint Dominic, the Spanish founder of the Dominican order, in the year 1214 in Prouy, France. According to this tradition, Mary gave him the Rosary in its current form, instructing him to preach it as a powerful spiritual weapon against the Albigensian heresy and as a source of grace for believers. As a matter of faith and devotional tradition, this story is incredibly powerful and meaningful for millions. As a matter of strict historical fact, however, the origins of the Rosary are much older, more gradual, more complex, and almost certainly involved cross-cultural influences. Like in other religions, the earliest Christian monks, the Desert Fathers in Egypt and Syria, back in the 3rd and 4th centuries CE, were deeply committed to repetitive prayer. following injunctions like the Apostle Paul's call to pray without ceasing, 1 Thessalonians 5:17. They sought ways to count thousands upon thousands of repetitions of short prayers like the Kyrie eleison, Lord, have mercy, or the Jesus prayer, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. They didn't initially use beads in the way we think of them. Archaeological and textual evidence suggests they would often fill their pockets or laps with pebbles and transfer one pebble to another pocket after each prayer. More commonly, especially in the Eastern Christian tradition, they would tie a series of knots into a rope. This knotted prayer rope, known in the Eastern Orthodox tradition as a chotki, Russian, or kombaskini Greek, often has 33, 50, 100, or even 300 knots, and it is still widely used today. Crucially, the prayer rope predates the widespread use of beaded prayer counters in Western Christianity. Meanwhile, in the medieval West, roughly 9th, the official prayer book of the Church, particularly for monks and literate clergy, was the Book of Psalms, containing 150 biblical psalms. Reciting the entire Psalter was a central part of monastic life. However, the vast majority of the Laetitha common people were illiterate and certainly couldn't read Latin, the language of the Church. So, monks and priests encouraged them, as a substitute for the 150 psalms, to simply pray the Our Father, Pater Noster, in Latin, 150 times instead. To keep track of these 150 paternosters, people began to use simple counting aids. Initially, perhaps just transferring pebbles or marking tallies, but increasingly, using a knotted string or a string of 150 beads. This tool became commonly known in medieval Europe as a paternoster string. It was, essentially, just a counter for the Our Father. Guilds of paternoster makers even sprang up in cities like London. So how did we get from this simple 150 bead paternoster counter for the Our Father to the complex 59 bead rosary focused primarily on the Hail Mary Ave Maria and meditation on specific mysteries? And where might the influence of the mala and the tasbih come in? This is where the timeline gets crucial and suggestive. The paternoster string seems to have developed somewhat indigenously in Europe as a substitute psalter. However, the format often took using beads on a string, sometimes with divider beads marking sections, for example, every 10 or 25 beads. And its explosion in popularity became particularly widespread during and immediately after the period of the Crusades, roughly late 11th to 13th centuries. Is it merely a coincidence that European Christians were engaged in prolonged, intense, often violent, but undeniably intimate cultural contact with the Islamic world where the tasbih was already a well-established and visible devotional tool at the exact same time that beaded prayer counters exploded in popularity back home? In Christian Europe, many historians and scholars of comparative religion argue no, it is likely not a coincidence. While direct proof of borrowing is elusive, the circumstantial evidence is strong. European crusaders and pilgrims would have certainly seen Muslims using the tasbih. It is highly plausible, even probable, that exposure to the Islamic tasbih influenced the form, design, especially the use of divider beads, materials, and general adoption of beaded rather than just knotted prayer counters in Christian Europe. Once again, the underlying technology using beads on a string for focused, repetitive prayer was simply too practical, too elegant, and too spiritually useful to ignore, regardless of its origins. This basic beaded counter, the paternoster string, was then given its final, complex form, primarily between the 12th and 15th centuries. During this time, devotion to the Virgin Mary grew exponentially in Europe. The Hail Mary, Ave Maria prayer evolved into its current form and began to replace the Our Father as the primary prayer repeated on the beads. Simultaneously, a new devotional practice emerged, possibly originating with Carthusian monks like Dominic of Prussia in the early 15th century. Combining the repetitive praying of Aves with meditation on specific key events, the mysteries from the life of Jesus and Mary, joyful, sorrowful, glorious. This powerful, combined devotion, which blended tactile counting with vocal prayer and mental meditation, visualization, was given the beautiful name Rosarium, Latin for rose garden or garland of roses, linking the prayers metaphorically to roses offered to Mary. The structure was eventually standardized to the familiar 59 beads. The pious legend attributing its origin directly to Saint Dominic and the Virgin Mary solidified later, adding divine authority to this gradually evolved practice. The modern rosary was born. It was a beautiful and powerful synthesis, an evolution of an ancient Christian counting tool, pebbles, knots, paternostres, likely influenced in its beaded form by cross-cultural contact with the Islamic tasbih, which itself was likely influenced by the Indian mala, and finally imbued with a new, complex structure centered on Marian devotion and meditation on the gospel mysteries. So, the prayer bead is a truly global human story. It is a piece of spiritual technology that appears in remarkably similar forms and serving the exact same fundamental purpose. In Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, Sikhism, Jainism, and Christianity, both East and West. In every single case, its core function is the same: to liberate the mind from the mechanical burden of counting during repetitive prayer or mantra recitation, and simultaneously to anchor the body and the senses to a single, sacred, rhythmic purpose, thereby facilitating a deeper state of focus, devotion, or meditation. It is a brilliant, simple, universally effective tool designed to solve the universal human problem of a wandering, easily distracted mind during spiritual practice. And this brings us back to the great, unresolved, historical and anthropological debate. Is this a clear, linear story of cultural diffusion? Did this brilliant idea originate just once, perhaps millennia ago in India, as the Japa Mala? Did it then spread like spiritual wildfire eastward along the Silk Road with Buddhism, and westward through trade and conquest, being adopted and adapted first by Islam as the tasbih, and finally influencing the design and popularity of beaded prayer counters which became the rosary in Christian Europe after the Crusades? Or is this primarily a story of convergent evolution? Is the fundamental idea of using beads, knots, or pebbles on a string to count just an inherently obvious one? Is this a case of different people in different parts of the world, independently facing the exact same cognitive challenge, a distracted mind during repetitive prayer, and independently inventing or repeatedly reinventing the exact same perfect low-tech tool to solve it? Could the similarities be due less to direct borrowing and more to the universal structure of the human mind and the shared physics of needing to count things? Perhaps the most likely truth lies somewhere in a complex interplay between these two models. A fundamentally useful idea, likely invented multiple times, but its specific forms and widespread adoption heavily influenced by cross-cultural encounters and borrowing. Ultimately, the ubiquity of the prayer bead forces us to consider: what does this shared tool suggest? Does it point towards a hidden unity underlying the diverse practices of world religions, a common human yearning expressed through a common technology, or does it simply reveal a common human ingenuity, the practical ways our minds and hands have always worked together to solve the challenges of focus and devotion? Let me know what you think, respectfully, in the comments below. If you found this deep dive into a hidden global technology fascinating, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content that uncovers the hidden threads that connect our world's diverse beliefs and practices. Thanks for watching.